The pre-dawn darkness over the Pacific was absolute. On December 7, 1943, a single United States Marine, a rifleman from the 2nd Marine Division, was dumped onto a tiny, insignificant sliver of coral and sand known as Betio Island, Tarawa Atoll. His mission was simple, yet monumental, to mark the landing beaches for the incoming first wave of amtracs. But as the sun began to bleed on the horizon, the Japanese garrison awoke in a storm of steel and fire. The Marine's Higgins boat was shattered, his team was killed or scattered, and he was left alone, wounded, and presumed dead. For the next 19 hours, one man would stand against a fortress. This is not a legend. This is the true story of a Marine who held the beach alone. Japanese commanders, reviewing the brutal aftermath, simply could not believe it. How is it possible? This is the story of PFC James D. Norene and his solitary, defiant stand on the hellish shores of Red Beach 1. To understand the sheer impossibility of Norene's task, one must first understand Tarawa. The Japanese had transformed Betio, an island barely 2 miles long and half a mile wide, into what was arguably the most fortified piece of real estate on the planet. Its commander, Rear Admiral Keiji Shibasaki, boasted that 1,000,000 men cannot take Tarawa in 100 years. He had over 4,800 elite troops, mostly of the 7th Sasebo Special Naval Landing Force. The entire island was a labyrinth of concrete and coconut log pillboxes, interconnected trenches, and over 500 firing positions. The centerpiece of its defense was a seawall, rising 4 to 5 feet high, creating a perfect, murderous barrier for any attacker. The American plan, Operation Galvanic, was audacious. It called for a direct, frontal assault on the heavily fortified North Shore. The 2nd Marine Division, under Major General Julian C. Smith, was tasked with the Herculean job. Their success hinged on a complex, timed ballet of naval bombardment, air strikes, and the precise arrival of amphibious tractors, amtracs, that could crawl over the fringing reef. But the entire plan was fragile. If any element failed, the first waves of Marines would be delivered into a slaughterhouse. And fail it did. The pre-invasion bombardment, while awesome in its fury, failed to destroy the deeply dug-in Japanese gun emplacements. A critical tide failed to rise, leaving a shallow lagoon that grounded the deeper draft Higgins boats carrying vital reinforcements and supplies. The amtracs became slow, bobbing targets. The meticulously planned landing schedules dissolved into chaos before a single Marine set foot on the beach. It was into this maelstrom that a small, specialized team was sent hours before the main assault, the Scout Sniper Platoon. Their job was to land under cover of darkness, identify key landmarks, and guide the incoming waves to their designated sectors, Red Beach 1, 2, and 3. One of those Marines was PFC James D. Norene. At 0400 hours, the Scout Sniper team's rubber boat was cast adrift from their transport. Their objective was to paddle silently to the long, finger-like pier that jutted out into the lagoon, a key navigational marker for Red Beach 1. The sea was choppy, the darkness a suffocating blanket. They moved with agonizing slowness, the only sound the dip of their paddles and the pounding of their own hearts. Pause. But the Japanese were vigilant. A searchlight from a wrecked freighter off the coast snapped on, its beams slicing across the black water. It found them. In an instant, the quiet night was torn apart by the staccato crack of a 13mm heavy machine gun. Tracers ripped into their fragile craft. The boat disintegrated. Men were thrown into the churning, blood-warm water. Some were killed instantly. Others, wounded, struggled against the weight of their gear and the relentless fire. Norene was hit, a shard of hot metal tearing into his leg. He fought the shock and the pain, managing to cling to a piece of wreckage. The current, the chaos, and the continuing enemy fire scattered the survivors. Norene found himself being pushed, alone, not towards the pier, but towards the base of the seawall on Red Beach 1 itself. He dragged his bleeding body through the shallow surf and collapsed in a heap of sand and coral rubble at the base of the 4-foot-high barrier. To the Japanese observers, he was just another corpse washed ashore. The main invasion was still hours away. As the sky lightened to a grim gray, The greatest naval bombardment of the Pacific War to date began to fall upon Betio. The roar was deafening, a continuous, earth-shattering hammer blow from battleships, cruisers, and destroyers. The island seemed to vanish in a cloud of smoke, flame, and pulverized coral. At 0900, the first waves of amtracs began their slow, agonizing run across the lagoon. And from the seemingly silenced island, hell erupted anew. Hidden gun ports swung open. The Japanese had survived. A storm of crossfires swept the lagoon. Amtracs were hit, exploding into fireballs or sinking slowly, their occupants trapped inside. Those Marines who made it to the beach found themselves pinned down on a narrow strip of sand, unable to move past the seawall. The landing was stalling, disintegrating into a bloody stalemate just feet from the water's edge. And huddled at the base of that wall, James Norene was an unwilling spectator to the carnage. He was behind enemy lines. To his front was the impenetrable seawall. To his rear, the lagoon, a killing zone of machine gun and mortar fire. And just a few yards away, on the other side of the wall, was the muzzle of a Japanese Type 92 heavy machine gun, its crew systematically firing into the landing craft and the Marines struggling in the water. Norene was armed with his M1 Garand rifle, a few grenades, and his training. His wound was painful, but not debilitating. He was isolated, with no communication, no support, and no idea if any of his team had survived. The logical move was to stay hidden, to play dead, and hope for a friendly advance that, as the morning wore on, seemed less and less likely. But James Norene was a United States Marine, and he saw a target. By 1100 hours, the situation for the Marines on Red Beach 1 was desperate. The commanding officer of the 3rd Battalion, 2nd Marines, Major John Scuttle, was still offshore, radioing back the infamous message, "We have nothing left to land." On the beach, leadership had devolved to small groups of NCOs and junior officers. Casualties were catastrophic. The air was thick with the smell of cordite, blood, and burning flesh. The deafening roar of battle was punctuated by the screams of the wounded and the relentless, metallic thump-thump-thump of the Japanese machine gun nest just inland from Norene's position. For Norene, the crisis was immediate and personal. He was in a tiny, isolated pocket of survival. Any movement could reveal his position. He was low on ammunition. His only source of water was the blood-soaked lagoon. The tropical sun beat down, turning the enclosed space behind the seawall into an oven. He could hear the guttural shouts of Japanese soldiers just feet away, repositioning, resupplying, and reinforcing their lines. They were so close he could smell their rice and fish cooking. The weight of his decision was immense. To engage was almost certainly a death sentence. It would draw the attention of every enemy soldier in the vicinity onto his single, vulnerable position. He was one man against a battalion. Yet, to do nothing was to watch his fellow Marines be cut down by a gun he could, in theory, silence. The moment of decision came. A Higgins boat, packed with reinforcements from L Company, was making its final, desperate approach directly into the field of fire of the Type 92. The gun crew traversed their weapon, preparing to unleash a torrent of 7.7mm rounds into the vulnerable landing craft. It was a sitting duck. Norene made his choice. He readied a grenade, pulled the pin, and counted. In one fluid motion, he rose from his hiding place and lobbed the explosive over the seawall. The blast was followed by a sudden, shocking silence from the machine gun nest. He had taken out the crew. For a brief, precious moment, the murderous fire on that sector of the beach ceased. The Higgins boat ground onto the sand, and a dozen Marines scrambled out, taking cover where moments before there was none. They had no idea who had saved them. But the silence was fleeting. The Japanese now knew an enemy was operating in their rear. Norene's position was no longer a hiding place. It was a fortress under siege. For the next several hours, he fought a one-man war. He shifted his position along a 20-yard stretch of the seawall. When Japanese infantry tried to rush his position, he met them with well-aimed shots from his Garand. When a grenade was tossed over the wall, he tossed it back. He became a phantom, a ghost in their midst. He would appear at one point, fire a few rounds, take out a soldier, and then disappear, only to reappear 50 feet away to do the same. To the Japanese, it seemed not like one man, but a squad of skilled infiltrators. They began to call and mortar fire on their own position, so determined were they to eliminate this thorn in their side. The world for James Norene shrank to the length of a seawall, the 8 rounds in his rifle, and the will to survive for one more minute. As dusk began to settle over the horrific landscape of Tarawa, a new kind of dread set in. The Japanese were masters of night combat, and a massive, coordinated banzai charge was expected. On the beach, the exhausted survivors of the 2nd Marines dug in with knives and helmets, preparing for the inevitable. Their lines were thin, fragmented, and low on ammunition. The entire precarious American foothold on Betio hung in the balance. For Norene, the approaching night meant his tenuous advantage would vanish. In the darkness, the Japanese could easily flank and overwhelm his solitary position. His ammunition was nearly gone. His body was screaming with exhaustion and pain from his wound. The turning point was not a dramatic, single action, but a culmination of 19 hours of sheer, unyielding determination. It was the decision, made anew with every passing minute, to not yield, to not surrender, to fight until there was nothing left to fight with. His relentless harassment had a strategic impact he could never have foreseen. By forcing the Japanese to commit men and resources to hunt him down, he had disrupted their local counterattack preparations. The constant, unpredictable fire from within what they believed was their secure rear area sowed confusion and caution. The defenders on that section of Red Beach 1 were unable to mass for a concerted push against the thin Marine line because they were constantly looking over their shoulder, hunting a ghost. The true turning point came not from Norene's rifle, but from the Marines he had indirectly aided. The men of L and I companies, bolstered by the survivors who had landed thanks to his earlier actions, had used the breathing space he provided to consolidate their position. Under the leadership of men like Major Michael Ryan, who had taken command of a ragged group from multiple units, they began to organize a coherent defense. They located Japanese communication wires and cut them. They brought up a 37mm gun and began to methodically blast apart pillboxes. The link-up, when it came, was as sudden as it was unbelievable. A fire team from L Company, pushing gingerly along the seawall, clearing bunkers, rounded a corner of shattered coral. They expected to see Japanese. Instead, they saw a single, haggard, blood-caked Marine, his uniform in tatters, leaning against the seawall with his Garand pointed at them. He identified himself with a hoarse, parched shout. Norene, Scout Sniper. The Marines stared in stunned silence. They had been fighting for this stretch of beach all day. They had seen the carnage, the impossibility of the landing. The idea that one man had been holding this section, alone, for the entire battle, was beyond comprehension. He wasn't just holding a position. He had been actively waging a one-man war against the heart of the Japanese defense. The Battle of Tarawa would rage for another 2 days, a brutal, close-quarters fight that cost the lives of nearly 1,000 Marines and sailors and wounded over 2,000 more. Almost the entire Japanese garrison was wiped out. But the foothold gained on that first, bloody day was secured, and men like James Norene were the reason why. When the fighting on his sector of Red Beach 1 subsided, the true scope of his solo defense became clear. In his immediate vicinity, the bodies of over a dozen Japanese soldiers were found, all killed by well-aimed rifle fire or grenades. He had single-handedly neutralized a key machine gun nest and disrupted enemy operations for a critical 19-hour period. His actions, born of sheer courage and initiative, had saved an untold number of Marine lives and directly contributed to the eventual American victory on that hellish shore. For his conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty, Private First Class James D. Norene was awarded the Navy Cross, the nation's second highest award for combat valor. The citation chronicled his solitary vigil, his unwavering defense, and his profound impact on the battle. The legacy of Tarawa is one of sacrifice and lessons learned in blood. It taught the U.S. Navy and Marine Corps brutal lessons about amphibious assaults that would save countless lives in the campaigns to come at Saipan, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. But within that larger legacy are the individual stories of almost unimaginable heroism. James Norene's stand is one of them. It is a testament to the power of one soldier, armed with little more than courage and a rifle, to change the tide of a battle. When interrogated after the battle, captured Japanese officers expressed utter disbelief. They could not reconcile the relentless, disruptive fire from their rear with the reality of one wounded, isolated Marine. To them, it was tactically impossible. James Norene proved them wrong. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to this channel as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.